Chapter 7, Vicam Station. I had not slept well. The dreams I had were so vivid that they could have actually happened. I woke up feeling exhausted, for I had been walking over hilly terrain all night. Over breakfast, I asked Carlos to tell me where we were going and what I was to expect upon getting there. "All I can say is that I'm going to take you to meet some people," he said matter-of-factly. "And there is no way of knowing what to expect when we get to the party because power is unpredictable." "The party? What kind of party?" "A gathering, a fiesta," Carlos said as he signaled the waitress for the check. "In that case, I'd better change into something more suitable," I told him. While Carlos paid the check, I hurried back to my room to change. The only dressy clothes in my travel bag were a beige linen skirt and a sleeveless silk blouse I had purchased with the money Nalita had left me. I had put the garments in the bag at the last moment with no thought of ever wearing them. Now I put them on quickly and hurried out the door. Carlos was standing by the car checking the coolant under the hood. "Where exactly is this party?" I asked, trying to keep a lid on my excitement. "In the Yaqui town of Vicam," he said, closing the hood with a bang. "As I told you, I want you to meet some people I've been associated with. They are having a small gathering in your honor." "My honor? But I've never met them, have I?" "No, you haven't, but they are anxious to meet you." "Why? Did you tell them about me? When did you see them?" We had not left each other's company since we had crossed the border. Unless Carlos had slipped out of his room during the night, there was no way he could have met anyone. Perhaps someone had telephoned or sent him a message. A strange agitation possessed me. The only people I knew in Mexico were Clara, Nalita, and Mr. Abelar, and of course Emilito, who I was certain was not one to attend social gatherings. "I can't wait to meet them," I said excitedly. "Do I look all right?" Carlos scanned me from head to toe. "Don't you have some proper walking shoes?" "I can't wear hiking boots with this outfit," I said. "It would ruin the look." I realized that I was going to great lengths to impress the people I was going to meet, to the extent of wearing uncomfortable dress sandals, but I wanted to look elegant, not as though I had been trekking in the desert with one outfit to my name. Besides, Carlos had stipulated that the party was in someone's house and that we were going to drive there. I didn't see too much walking on the agenda. "All right then, let's go," Carlos said. I got in the car, trying hard not to wrinkle my skirt. We drove out of Guaymas, then headed southeast towards the Yaqui towns. It was obvious that Carlos had driven on Mexican roads many times, for the car hugged the road as he negotiated the curves in an expert manner. Nevertheless, every time the road disappeared around a bend, I held my breath, hoping that we would not be surprised by an oncoming truck or bus passing in our lane. Placed along the roadside, as a constant reminder of a tragic mishap, were wooden crosses or shrines with wilted flowers marking the spot where a car had gone off the road, or there had been a collision, or a person had accidentally been run down. To my distress, these morbid memorials were disturbingly numerous. We came to a small town made up of a cluster of adobe houses with doors opening into dark rooms that looked like caves. In an open courtyard delineated with cane fences, I spotted a fat white chicken being taunted by two smaller reddish hens. Next to a house was a rust-covered car with no wheels, the remnants of an accident, and having been abandoned there, never moved again. "Is this one of the Yaqui town?" I asked. "No, this is Empalm. The Yaqui towns are further ahead. Vicam, where we are headed, is one of the 8 pueblos regarded by the Yaqui as being located on sacred ground. The Rayam Chronicles lists them as having been established before the coming of the Spaniards." What is the Rayam Chronicles? It is a list of memorable dates in Yaqui history. According to the chronicle, there were 4 great men who called the people together and led them around the boundaries of Yaqui country. They went to Cabora on the Cocoraqui Arroyo, from there to Tacalame, the peak just north of Guaymas. As they went along the boundary, they preached and sang with the people, thus, establishing the boundary line of Yaqui territory. After that, they founded the 8 pueblos. Singing of the boundary and establishing the towns sometime in the remote past is the solemn belief about the origin of their tribal territory. What are the other 7 towns? I asked. Cocorit, Vicam, Tarim, Padam, Rayam, Huarives, and Belem, Carlos said. They were situated along the lower 60 miles of the Yaqui River, but during the late 19th century, the main channel of the Yaqui River below Padam shifted sharply and Belem was left completely without water, and the water supply to Huarives and Rayam was severely curtailed. What happened to the people in these places? They had to relocate elsewhere. Many were given land by the people of Padam, others moved to Impalm or started new settlements, but with the steady encroachment of Mexicans into their lands, most of the Yaquis have left the original sites, such as Vicam, and have set up new villages elsewhere, often with the same name. The same thing happened in Vicam. A new village center, called Vicam Station, was established on the railroad in Vicam territory. However, the majority of the people now living there are Mexicans. We passed another settlement, more clusters of low, flat-roofed adobe houses surrounded by cane fences held in place with crooked posts. A fat woman with a shawl over her head stood in a doorway, watching the cars passing on the highway. Next to the house were a pair of dusty gray donkeys tethered in a small corral with a sloping ramada. An old man, who could barely make it up the hill, was pushing a 4-wheeled cart full of manure. Elsewhere, a group of men were standing near the roadside as if waiting for a bus or truck to come along and pick them up and take them to Guaymas. They waved at us as we passed. A mangy dog barked and ran after the car as we slowed down for a curve, then we sped up and left the dog biting a cloud of dust. Around noon, Carlos turned off the main highway onto a well-packed dirt road. We drove through the heat and dust to a small cluster of adobe houses placed in a haphazard fashion with no regular block or street plan. Some of the houses had corrugated tin roofs with adobe walls. They were lined up one against the other in a group of 4 or 5 room additions that would allow an extended family to live together. Sometimes a cane fence shut them off completely from their neighbors. Is this where the Yaqui Indians live? I asked, rolling up my window so the dust wouldn't get in the car. Carlos pointed in the opposite direction. No. The Yaqui Indians live on the other side of the highway behind those cane fences we saw earlier as we drove up. The Mexicans, or Yorums as the Yaqui call them, live in these houses. Carlos said that Mexican houses in Vicam Station were better built than those on the other side of the main highway. These had cement floors, some electricity, and families owned television sets, radios, bicycles, and sometimes even a car or truck. What about the Yaqui Indians? How do they live? I asked. Their houses have dirt floors, no electricity, and they have to bring in water from the wells or irrigation ditches in 5-gallon gasoline cans, Carlos replied. Even here it seems that it's important to be born on the right side of the highway, I said. The entire world is divided into the haves and the have-nots. Carlos said that demarcations and comparisons were universal, that there were always people who had and those that didn't, no matter how poor they were. Dichotomies are a part of the human condition, he explained. They are built into language, which is based on contrast and opposition. Like day and night, male and female. Hot dogs and hamburgers, I added. He gave me a quizzical look. I told Carlos that as children on hot summer days, my brothers and I used to run through the sprinklers naked. They would tease me saying that I didn't have a hot dog appendage the way they had. They said mine looked like a hamburger. When I insisted that hamburgers were better than hot dogs, they immediately demonstrated the contrary by peeing in perfect arcs. When I tried futility to do the same, they laughed because I could only tinkle straight down. They had convinced me that I was born without something essential. I told Carlos that I was deficient, and that feeling dogged me for the rest of my life. I felt cheated for not having been born a male. Carlos said hot dogs aren't any better than hamburgers, laughing. You have been fooled by the authority and certainty that males have as children that they are superior by virtue of the fact that they are desired by their parents, whereas females usually are not. Males depart from a more privileged position, but we are not intrinsically superior. I remembered Clara assuring me of the same fact. The womb is the giver of life, she had said. It can create, be a source of strength, move things, and make things happen. You're a fool to blindly accept a position of inferiority without question. Why not accept a position of strength and confidence instead? The womb can give you all that and more. It is the organ of life itself. A group of children ran after the car, playfully hurling small rocks at it. Carlos parked in front of a house with a blue curtain covering the entrance. Instantly, young boys crowded around the car, stroking it and kicking the tires. Others kept their distance and watched wide-eyed as we stepped out of the car. "Is this where the party is?" I asked, avoiding the eyes of the children. Carlos shook his head. "No, but I have to pay my respects to some friends first. They've always been very kind to me." A woman wearing a white embroidered blouse and a long faded blue skirt and maroon apron came out to greet us. Her skin was brown and smooth, and her eyes were shiny, black, and friendly. Carlos introduced her as Dona Mercedes, who smiled warmly as she grasped my hand in a firm handshake. She pulled the curtain aside and invited us inside her home. The room was semi-dark, the walls were of stucco and the cement floor had been recently swept with water. I was surprised how cool it was. A reddish curtain, tacked to the window, gave the room a mellow glow. The curtain fluttered in the breeze and let light through as it billowed away from the window. Through an open doorway, I could see an iron cot, like the ones lined up in army barracks. A chest of drawers with an altar on top stood next to the bed. I saw a crucifix draped with a rosary and a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Leaning against it was a photograph of a young man. The shrine was flanked with flowers and 2 lighted white votive candles. All I could think was that somebody had recently died. For it looked like a shrine to the memory of a departed family member. We sat down on a maroon sofa that had lost most of its stuffing. I kept sinking in deeper until I hit a hard board. The springs were poking my bottom uncomfortably, but I thought it would be impolite to stand up and sit elsewhere. 2 girls around 8 and 10, from time to time, poked their heads into the room from behind the blue curtain and let out exuberant giggles. Carlos stopped his conversation with Dona Mercedes long enough to play peekaboo with the girls. Then the hostess said something to Carlos in rapid Spanish I could not follow. "Dona Mercedes says Benny should be back any moment," Carlos said. "He just went to the store to buy sodas." "Did he know we were coming?" I asked. "Someone had seen the car on the road," he replied, "so he knew we would be stopping by his house the way I always do." I was eager to meet Benny, Dona Mercedes' youngest son. Carlos had said he was in his mid-20s and that sometimes when he did fieldwork in Vicam, he stayed in the back room which Benny occupied when he was not away constructing irrigation ditches for the huge cooperative farms owned by the Mexican government. His older brother, Raul, had recently died in a landslide while dynamiting to build a tunnel through a hill. "Is this the Benny who wants the shower?" I whispered to Carlos. Carlos nodded. On our drive from Guaymas, he had told me a story about a friend of his whose dream was to live in the United States. He said that every time he visited his house, Benny begged Carlos to hide him in the trunk of his car and smuggle him across the border. Carlos had always refused, but this did nothing to impede their friendship. Benny had felt fate had dealt him a harsh blow for allowing him to be born on the wrong side of the Rio Bravo. Especially when his mother, who while pregnant with him, had been visiting relatives in Tucson, could have had her child there, thereby making him a citizen of the United States. He was constantly talking about going north, boasting that he had made it to Arizona twice, but had been caught and deported. Benny knew what kind of cars Americans drove, the large houses they lived in, and he had even been in the well-stocked department stores in Phoenix. One day, coming home from working in the fields, Benny was washing up in the back of his house over a water trough. He again asked Carlos to hide him in the trunk of his car when he left for the United States the following day. "I'd give an arm and a leg to have a decent shower," Benny had told him. Carlos assured his friend that although he couldn't take him to the United States, his second dream would be fulfilled. He would have the shower of his dreams. Benny looked surprised. "That's impossible," he said. "No, really," Carlos had insisted. "When I was a boy, I helped my grandfather build a shower on his farm. I'll build one just like it for you." Carlos had described how he could connect a pipe to the water storage tank in the back of the house. With a series of pulleys and with the help of gravity, the water would run into a smaller tank outside the cooking area. A chain hooked up to a plug, when released, would allow the water to rush through a shower head with enough pressure to douse whoever stood underneath. He would even build a cane barrier for privacy and allow the water to be collected in a trough below for recycling. "You're crazy," Benny said after listening to Carlos' plans. "What kind of shower is that? I may as well bathe in the irrigation ditch." Carlos admitted that he was stunned. "I want a real shower with tile walls, a glass door with swans engraved on it like I saw in the Home and Garden magazine, and real plumbing with hot and cold water all year around." Carlos confessed that it had not occurred to him that that was what his friend had in mind. He had to admit that Benny was right, such a shower was impossible to construct where he lived. "Were you still friends after that?" I had asked. "Yes, but the gifts I always brought with me, the clothes for his two sisters, the radios, the portable TV, always seemed inadequate." Donna Mercedes' curtain opened and a tall slim young man with a winning smile entered, wearing American Levi's, a black leather jacket and a baseball cap. He embraced Carlos by repeatedly slapping both palms on his back. He glanced at me sitting on the sofa, then smiled shyly as we were introduced. After exchanging a few English phrases, he seemed to have exhausted his repertoire and the conversation reverted back to Spanish. Through an opening in the curtain, I watched the girls playing outside. At one point Donna Mercedes took me to the back porch area covered by a ramada. It was also the kitchen area where food was cooking in huge aluminum pots over a pit lined with stones. To the side, I could see a water-holding tank. I scrutinized the area with my contractor's eye, wondering if it would be possible to construct a shower. There was adequate space, but, of course, no plumbing. I thought of the beautiful bathroom in Clara's house, with water mysteriously running under the floor. The water had been piped in from a natural underground spring, but there was no running water around Benny's house, except the water from the well, whose use was restricted and had to be brought to the house in a bucket. I realized that to build a shower in Benny's house was an impossible undertaking. The entire community would have to be renovated. After a polite interval, we got up and said goodbye. Benny came with us to accompany us part of the way. He said we needed him to give us directions, for the roads were not marked and we could easily get lost if we left the highway. Besides, he too wanted to visit Vicam where his favorite uncle lived. As we drove, Carlos talked with Benny in the front seat. I could tell Carlos was getting nervous. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as if he were clenching his fists. At first I thought it was because Benny had hitched a ride, but then I concluded it was our destination that made him nervous. I, too, was ill at ease. After a thorough recapitulation, I came to the conclusion that I was never fond of social gatherings because I was too stiff, too afraid of making a fool of myself. Later, I had a bona fide reason for not to get entangled with people and their enterprises. Both Clara and Emilito had warned me not to fall prey to the mesmeric commands governing social interaction. The only thing a man is after, Clara had said with her customary frankness, is to maneuver a woman into a position where he can leave his luminous worms inside her body. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Clara explained that during the sex act, a man leaves his energy inside a woman's body. These luminous worms, as she had called them, by feeding off the energy of the woman, force her to support her man energetically against her will or her knowledge. Sorcerers don't waste their sexual energy, but store it to be used for dreaming or stalking. Both of these activities take enormous amounts of energy, Clara said. Our basic energy is our sexual energy. So we must not dissipate it in a momentary exchange with someone we don't give a hoot about. She said that women are mesmerized by men on an energetic level. Only by recapitulating her life can a woman free herself from the burden of having to continually place her energy at the disposal of men. The car suddenly swerved onto a dirt road and nearly collided with a giant saguaro cactus that had fallen onto its side. From then on, the ride was bumpy. I rolled up the window so the dust wouldn't get into the car and scanned the terrain through the insect-spotted glass. I expected to see a colonial mansion like Clara's, hidden among the dense shrubs and mesquite groves, but all I saw was a cluster of houses made of sun-dried mud brick, held together with packed straw, the typical construction of the area. Carlos parked the car on a gravel shoulder. "Are we here?" I asked lamely. "I don't see any place big enough for a party." "We have to let Benny off here," he said. "This is where his uncle lives." We said goodbye and promised to meet again the next day to look for Piscola masks Carlos wanted to donate to the university's ethnographic museum. Then Benny gave the car's fender a firm pat, as if to send it on its way, and we continued on the road for a few more miles. In front of a wall of dense shrubbery, we stopped again. "We have to walk a bit," Carlos said, getting out of the car. My heart sank at the thought of walking through the underbrush in my dress sandals, but walk we did. Or rather, Carlos walked. I hobbled behind him like a lame mule. My linen skirt was covered with dust, and my bare arms scratched from the underbrush. "I have to take off my nylons," I said, after about 20 minutes of trekking. "They have too many runs in them. I can't show up with polka-dot legs." Carlos agreed. I stepped behind a tolan tree and discreetly removed my pantyhose and took the opportunity to urinate out of sheer nervousness. I stuffed the nylons into my shoulder bag and caught up with Carlos, who was looking at a small cactus down the path. I had no idea where we were going. All I could do was to follow Carlos, cool and comfortable in his long-sleeved shirt and Levi's. I envied the agility with which he walked over the uneven terrain in his hiking boots. From time to time, he held aside a tree branch or a thorny shrub as we passed. "Can't we go back to the car to change my shoes?" I asked, knowing we couldn't. I really wanted to go further than that. I wanted to drive to a motel, check in and sit under the shade of an umbrella by the pool, sipping a cool soda. "No. We can't go back," he said decisively. "They're expecting us and we're late as it is." I began to pout. "We're almost there," he said reassuringly. The smell of smoke made me pick up my pace, for I knew we were nearing habitation. My stomach was growling. I had worked up a ferocious appetite. I was wondering if I would be able to eat the food or if I would have to settle for politely nibbling, when I heard Carlos say, "I see they've already started the festivities. Hurry, they're expecting us." We crossed a wooden bridge over a gully. There was water under it in the arroyo. The broken planks creaked as we passed. I paused to look down. The water was muddy and slow-moving. It looked like a stream of running milk chocolate. It must have come down from the area of the Obregon Dam, where there was a reddish clay deposit. The river of chocolate, I dubbed it, for it looked like thick cocoa. Then I saw the house nested among a clump of manzanilla trees. It was not a beautiful estate, like Clara's, but a group of humble adobe huts. Children and chickens ran in the courtyard. A mangy dog was scrounging for scraps. Around the side of the house, a donkey was tied to a stake in the ground, being able to graze only as far as the rope around his neck would allow him. I felt a moment of sheer terror. I was no different from that donkey with a noose around its neck that didn't allow it to move beyond the limits of its known world. Yet, we are all like that. If we pulled on the rope too hard, we would strangle ourselves. We have means at our disposal to cut our ties, yet fear prevents us from ever trying, and even as we cut one rope, another rope becomes visible, in a gigantic knot tied with an infinite number of ropes, all serving the same purpose: to hold us fixed and not allow us to stray from the life into which we were born. As I crossed the creaky bridge on shaky steps, I knew Clara and Nelita would not be among the invited guests. I would not meet them here today.